The iron beast of the Union Pacific wheezed to a stop at Frontier Station, Wyoming territory, belching black smoke into the crystalline November sky. Annabelle Rose pressed her face against the grimy window one last time, watching the desolate landscape that would become her new world. Her gloved fingers clutched the worn leather handle of a battered valise, the sum total of her earthly possessions. She had answered the advertisement 3 months ago, her trembling hand forming careful letters on cheap paper. Respectable rancher seeks companionship, must be willing to work, past circumstances not questioned. The brevity had appealed to her. No flowery promises, no false romance, just survival wrapped in the thin veneer of matrimony. The conductor's bark cut through her thoughts. Frontier Station, end of the line for some folks. Annabelle stood, smoothing her traveling dress, a faded gray wool that had seen better days. The other passengers gave her wide berth, as they had for the entire journey from St. Louis. Word traveled fast on the trains, whispered behind gloved hands and newspaper shields. She kept her chin high, eyes forward. The platform was little more than warped planks and rusted nails, beaten smooth by wind and boot heels. She stepped down carefully, the Wyoming cold slapping her face with unexpected ferocity. Her breath clouded white in the air. He was impossible to miss. Eli McCall stood apart from the sparse crowd like a mountain stands apart from hills, 6 feet and change of weathered muscle and silent assessment, wrapped in a long duster that had seen too many winters. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she caught the glint of eyes the color of river stones, gray and unreadable. He didn't move toward her, didn't smile, just watched as she navigated the platform with her meager luggage. When she finally stood before him, close enough to see the lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth, he spoke, "Mrs. Rose." His voice was low, roughened by tobacco and disuse. Not unkind, but not warm either. A voice for giving orders to cattle and horses. "Miss Rose," she corrected quietly. "Or Annabelle, whichever suits." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise. Perhaps. Most mail-order brides claimed widowhood whether true or not. It was safer that way. But Annabelle was done with lies, even the kind ones. "Let's ride." 2 words. No greeting. No pleasantries about her journey. He turned and walked toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy mules, his boots raising small clouds of dust. She followed, noting how he didn't offer to carry her valise. Good. She preferred it that way. The wagon bed held supplies, sacks of flour, coffee, salt, the necessities of frontier life. He'd placed a folded blanket on the bench seat, the only concession to her comfort she would see. Annabelle climbed up without assistance, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. The valise went between her feet. Eli swung up beside her with the fluid grace of a man born to horseback, keeping careful distance between them. The bench was narrow, but he managed to avoid even the brush of her sleeve. They rode in silence through the shabby collection of buildings that passed for a town. Frontier was generous naming: a general store, a saloon, a boarding house that likely doubled for other purposes. Hard-faced women watched from doorways. Men paused in their business to stare. Annabelle kept her eyes on the rumps of the mules. The road, if the rutted track could be called such, wound north into the Medicine Bow Mountains. Sage and juniper gave way to lodgepole pine. The sky stretched endless and merciless above them, a blue so sharp it hurt to look at. No clouds, no promise of snow yet, though Annabelle could smell it coming on the wind. An hour passed, then 2. The silence between them grew thick as winter wool. Finally, curiosity won over caution. "How far to your place?" She kept her voice neutral, just loud enough over the creak of wheels and harness. "Our place," the correction came swift. 8 miles from town, another hour, maybe less. "Our place." The words should have offered comfort. Instead, they sat heavy in her stomach. She'd been property before. The thought of being so again, even with legal papers saying otherwise, made her fingers tighten on the valise handle. The landscape grew wilder, lonelier. Jagged peaks loomed on all sides, their snow-capped summits already claiming winter's grip. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off canyon walls, no other sound but wind and wheel. When they finally turned off the main track onto a path barely wide enough for the wagon, Annabelle glimpsed her new home. The cabin squatted in a meadow between two ridges, built of logs gone silver with age. Small, maybe 2 rooms, but solid-looking. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A barn stood off to one side, along with a corral holding a few horses, isolated, completely, utterly isolated. "It ain't much," Eli said, the first words he'd volunteered. "But it's warm and dry. Got good water from the creek." Annabelle studied the place that would cage or shelter her, depending on how the next days unfolded. "It's fine." He glanced at her then, a quick sideways assessment. "You can have the back room. I sleep by the fire. Door's got a latch." The implication hung between them. Privacy, safety, boundaries. She nodded once. They pulled up to the cabin as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks. This time, Eli did climb down first, but only to tend the mules. Annabelle gathered her valise and made her own way to the door, which stood slightly ajar. The interior was exactly what she expected. Sparse, functional, masculine. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough table with 2 chairs. Shelves holding tin plates and cups. A narrow doorway led to the back room. Everything worn smooth by use and time, but clean. Cleaner than she'd anticipated from a man living alone. She stood in the center of the main room, valise still clutched in both hands, unsure of the next move. Through the window, she watched Eli unhitch the mules with methodical precision. His movements were economical, practiced, a man comfortable with solitude and routine. When he finally entered, bringing the cold with him, they stood facing each other in the dimming light. Neither spoke. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Annabelle set down her valise and removed her gloves with deliberate calm. "I should make something clear from the start. Mr. McCall." His expression didn't change, but she sensed his attention sharpen. "I'll cook, clean, tend the house. I'll work hard, but there are conditions." She met his stone-gray eyes directly. "Don't touch me. Don't ask about my past. Those are my terms." A lesser man might have blustered, demanded explanations, asserted husbandly rights. Eli McCall simply nodded. "Fair enough. Got my own reasons for wanting a business arrangement." He moved to the fireplace, adding wood with careful attention. "Preacher comes through once a month. We'll make it legal then. Until that time, you're hired help with room and board." The relief nearly buckled her knees. "Agreed." He straightened, dusting his hands on worn denim. "There's stew in the pot, bread in the box, back room's got a bed and bureau. Outhouse is behind the barn." A pause. "Welcome to the Triple C Ranch." With that, he grabbed a rifle from pegs by the door and went back outside, leaving her alone in the gathering darkness. Annabelle stood motionless for several minutes, letting the reality settle into her bones. She was here. No going back to St. Louis. No returning to what she'd fled. This cabin, this silent man, this harsh landscape. They were her future now. Moving mechanically, she carried the valise to the back room. It was small but adequate. A narrow bed with a straw tick mattress and several quilts. A bureau with a cracked mirror. Pegs on the wall for clothes. A rag rug on the plank floor. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her shoulders to slump. Through the thin wall, she heard Eli return. The scrape of a chair. The clink of a spoon against tin. He was giving her space. Time to adjust. Or perhaps he simply didn't care to share his meal with a stranger. From her valise, she withdrew her few possessions. 2 dresses besides the one she wore. Undergarments mended too many times to count. A Bible with a cracked spine. A photograph wrapped in oilcloth. The only remnant of her life before. And at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of calico, the knife. She hefted it, testing the familiar weight. 7 inches of good steel, sharpened to a wicked edge. It had saved her once. She tucked it beneath a thin pillow, within easy reach. Night pressed against the windows. She could hear Eli moving about in the main room. The domestic sounds of a man preparing for sleep. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Perhaps. But Annabelle Rose had learned never to trust the darkness. She changed into her nightdress quickly, shivering in the cold. The bed was hard but clean, the quilts smelling of cedar and lye soap. She pulled them up to her chin and lay rigid, listening. Eli's footsteps crossed to the door, the bolt sliding home, locking the world out, locking her in. More footsteps, then the creak of what must be his own bed near the fire. Silence descended, broken only by the pop of settling logs and the distant howl of wind through pines. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, other rooms materialized, other beds, other nights when footsteps meant something very different. A sob tried to claw its way up her throat. She pressed a fist against her mouth, choking it back. No tears. She'd promised herself no more tears. They solved nothing, changed nothing. Only action mattered, only survival. The knife handle was smooth beneath her palm. Tomorrow she would begin the charade of being a frontier wife. She would cook and clean and make herself useful enough that Eli McCall wouldn't regret his bargain. She would build new walls around the ruins of her heart and pretend they were strong enough to last. But tonight, in this strange bed in this lonely cabin at the edge of the world, Annabelle Rose kept vigil with her ghosts and her blade, waiting for a dawn that seemed impossibly far away. The blizzard arrived 3 weeks after Annabelle, sweeping down from the mountains like God's own fury. She woke to a world erased, nothing visible through the windows but a solid wall of white. The cabin groaned under the wind's assault. Eli was already up, feeding the fire with grim efficiency. "Could last days," he said without preamble. "Maybe a week. Hope you ain't prone to cabin fever." She wasn't. Confinement held no terrors compared to her memories. But the forced proximity worried her. 3 weeks had established their careful dance of distance. She cooked, he ate, she cleaned. He worked outside. They spoke only of necessities, supplies needed, chores for the day, weather signs. Now the storm had trapped them in this small space with nothing but time. By the second day, the silence had grown thick enough to choke on. Annabelle kneaded bread dough with unnecessary force, aware of Eli whittling by the fire. The scrape of his knife on wood set her teeth on edge. Everything set her teeth on edge. His breathing, his footsteps, the way he cleared his throat before speaking. "Coffee's gone cold," he observed. She bit back a sharp reply. Of course it was cold. Everything was cold except the small circle near the hearth. Instead, she moved the pot closer to the flames, careful to maintain the invisible boundary between them. "Storm this bad killed half Tom Morrison's herd last winter." Eli continued, apparently determined to attempt conversation. "Found them frozen standing up come spring. How cheerful." The words escaped before she could stop them. To her surprise, he chuckled, a rusty sound, like hinges long unused. "Ain't much for cheerful talk, am I? Mary used to say." He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. Mary, the dead wife. In 3 weeks, it was the first time he'd mentioned her name. Annabelle shaped the dough into loaves, giving him space to continue or retreat. The silence stretched, filled only by wind howl and fire crack. "Finally," she ventured. "How long?" 4 years. His hands stilled on the wood. "Tried to birth our son alone while I was driving cattle to Cheyenne. Neighbor found them both 3 days later." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, compressed into flat statements of fact. Annabelle recognized the technique. How many times had she recited her own horrors in the same tone? "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He resumed whittling. "Long time ago, but it wasn't, not really. 4 years was nothing against that kind of wound." She knew how the dead kept living in empty chairs and cold beds, in the 1,000 daily reminders of absence. The 3rd day brought fever. Annabelle woke shivering so hard her teeth chattered, despite the pile of quilts. Her head felt stuffed with cotton, her throat raw. She tried to rise, and the room spun viciously. "Stay down!" Eli's voice came from somewhere above her. When had he entered her room? "Been listening to you cough all night?" She tried to protest, to remind him of their agreement, but only managed a weak croak. Her limbs felt weighted with lead. The cold had burrowed so deep into her bones she wondered if she'd ever be warm again. "Got to get you to the main room. Warmer by the fire." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "I'm going to carry you. No other way." Panic fluttered in her chest. "No, you'll die of lung fever in here." His tone brooked no argument. "I ain't explaining a dead bride to the preacher." Before she could marshal further protest, he scooped her up, quilts and all. The world tilted alarmingly. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting nausea and the terrifying vulnerability of being held. His arms were careful, impersonal, but still her body tried to recoil. He deposited her on his own narrow bed by the hearth, stepping back immediately. "I'll make willow bark tea, brings down fever." She huddled in the quilts, shaking as much from reaction as cold. The heat from the fire felt like knives on her skin. Everything hurt. Joints, head, the very act of breathing. "Should have seen it coming," Eli muttered, clanging pots with unusual clumsiness. "You're too thin. Don't eat enough. Work too hard." Through her misery, indignation sparked. "I work for my keep. Nobody said otherwise." He brought her a cup of bitter tea. "Drink." She managed a few sips before her stomach rebelled. The room wouldn't stop spinning. Dimly, she heard Eli curse, felt a cool cloth on her forehead. "Please," she whispered. "The other room. I'll be fine." "You'll be dead." He settled in the chair beside the bed, a careful distance away. "I'll sit watch. Keep the fire up. You just focus on breathing." The fever climbed higher as darkness fell. She drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between waking nightmares and burning dreams. Sometimes she was back in that house in St. Louis, hands at her throat, weight crushing her chest. Sometimes she was drowning in snow, ice filling her lungs. "Easy." A low voice, patient and steady. "You're safe. Just dreams." She surfaced to find herself half upright, gasping for air. Eli supported her shoulders, careful to touch only through layers of quilt. "Can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Slow and easy. That's it." His voice became an anchor in the fever storm. She focused on it through the endless night, through chills that rattled her bones and heat that scorched her skin. He never left the chair, never stopped talking. About nothing. Everything. The proper way to break a horse. How to read weather and cloud formations. The best fishing spots on Crow Creek. Sometime near dawn, she became aware of tears on her face. "I won't go back," she mumbled. "Rather die than go back. Nobody's taking you anywhere," Eli said firmly. "You're here. Storm's breaking. You'll be well soon." "Touch me and I'll leave," she insisted, her muddled mind fixating on the familiar threat. A pause, then, so quiet she almost missed it. "Then go, but not tonight." The gentleness in his voice undid her. She turned her face into the pillow and wept. For the first time in months, maybe years. Not the silent tears she'd trained herself to cry, but raw, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Eli said nothing, didn't try to comfort or quiet her, just kept his patient vigil while she purged months of terror and grief into his borrowed pillow. When the storm inside finally ebbed, matching the quieting wind outside, she lay exhausted and empty. Gray light filtered through the windows. The fever had broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Eli still sat in his chair, looking haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His clothes were rumpled, his usually neat hair standing at odd angles. "You stayed," she said unnecessarily. "Said I would." He stood stiffly, working kinks from his back. "I'll make breakfast." As he moved away, she found her voice. "Mr. McCall, Eli, thank you." He paused without turning. "What else was I going to do? Let you freeze?" But she'd heard the real answer in his voice through the fever dark, in the patient cadence of meaningless words meant only to anchor her to life. He could have dumped her by the fire and left her to live or die alone. Instead, he'd kept watch like she was something worth protecting. The thought terrified her more than the fever had. Recovery came slowly. 2 days passed before she could stand without the room spinning. Eli took over the cooking with surprising competence, brushing aside her protests. "You always cook?" she asked, watching him flip johnny cakes with practiced ease. "When needed. Man lives alone long enough. He learns or starves. Your wife must have been a good cook." The words slipped out before she could consider their wisdom. His hands stilled for just a moment. "She was, though she'd have laughed to see me at her stove. Said I cooked like I was shoeing horses, all force and no finesse." It was the most he'd volunteered about Mary. Annabelle sensed an opening, a slight easing of his rigid control. "How did you meet?" He slid a johnny cake onto her plate. "Her father hired me to break horses. I was 17, thought I knew everything. She was 15, knew she was smarter than any horse-breaking fool." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Took her 2 years to convince me she was right, about being smarter, about everything." They ate in companionable silence. Outside, the sun emerged for the first time in a week, turning the snow-buried landscape into painful brilliance. "I'll need to dig out to the barn," Eli observed. "Check the stock. I can help. You can sit by the fire and get your strength back." His tone brooked no argument. "Got no use for a ranch hand who collapses in snowdrifts." But as he bundled into his heavy coat and gloves, she saw him pause at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just you scared me some, during the fever." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her to puzzle over the admission. Eli McCall didn't seem like a man who scared easily. Certainly not over a hired woman he'd known less than a month. That night, she tried to return to her own room, but he stopped her with a look. "Fire's warmer here, until you're full well." She didn't argue, though they both knew the back room had its own small stove, some boundaries, once crossed, couldn't be easily rebuilt. She'd slept in his bed, wept in his presence, let him see her at her weakest. The careful distance between them had narrowed to something more dangerous than proximity. She settled onto the bed, acutely aware of him moving about the cabin. He'd changed the sheets, she noticed, giving her fresh ones that smelled of lye and winter air. Such a small consideration, but it made her throat tight. "I wasn't always what I am now," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Before, I had a different life." He paused in banking the fire, but didn't turn. "Most folks did. I was married, properly married, in a church with flowers and a white dress." The words felt strange on her tongue, like speaking of someone else's life. "He was charming, successful. Everyone said how lucky I was." Eli waited, patient as he'd been during her fever. The charm wore off quick once the church doors closed. She pulled the quilt higher, though the room was warm enough. "Turns out I wasn't the wife he wanted. Too tall, too plain, too contrary." He aimed to fix those flaws. With his fists, the question was quiet, carefully neutral. Among other methods, she closed her eyes, seeing Samuel's face, handsome and terrible. 2 years I endured it. Then one night, he came home drunker than usual. Said he'd found himself a prettier bird, was putting me out come morning. The memory crystallized, sharp as winter air. The weight of him, the smell of whiskey and rage. Her hand finding the letter opener on the bedside table. "I disagreed with his plan," she said simply. Eli turned then, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Good." One word, but it held understanding. Not absolution, she didn't need that from him. Not judgment either, just acknowledgement of necessity, of survival's harsh mathematics. Had to run after, his family had influence, money. They painted me as a Jezebel who murdered their golden boy in cold blood. She laughed bitterly. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am what they said. "You're alive," Eli said. "That's what you are. Alive when he meant you dead. Nothing else matters." The simple certainty in his voice undid something in her chest. She'd carried the weight of judgment, others and her own, for so long. She'd forgotten any other perspective existed. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" she asked. A woman who killed her husband, He considered the question, absently rubbing his shoulder where an old injury must pain him in the cold. Had a horse once, beautiful mare, sweet as sugar. Previous owner ruined her with whip and spur. She turned mean, bit anyone who came close. Everyone said put her down, she was too far gone. He moved to the window, looking out at the moon-silvered snow. Took me 6 months of patience, but she came around. Best horse I ever owned, loyal to the bone. I'm not a horse. Eli? No, he agreed. But you're not what they made you either. You're what you choose to be now. The words hung between them, profound in their simplicity. She thought of the knife still hidden beneath her pillow, her constant companion these months of running. What was she choosing to be? The forever victim? Sleeping with steel for comfort? Or something else? Something she hadn't dared imagine. Why did you place that advertisement? She asked. The real reason. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, loneliness is its own kind of death. Slower than fever, but just as sure. After Mary, I thought I wanted the silence. Thought I'd earned it, but the silence started talking back. And what it said wasn't fit for living with. She understood. Oh, how she understood. The weight of empty rooms, the echo of your own voice, the way solitude could twist in on itself until it became a living thing with teeth. So you invited a stranger into your home. Seemed less dangerous than the alternative. He turned from the window. Though you've been more excitement than I bargained for. Was that humor in his voice? She found herself almost smiling. I did warn you. That you did. He settled into his chair with a book, the matter apparently closed. Sleep now. Morning comes early, and snow won't shovel itself. But sleep eluded her. She lay watching the fire shadows dance on the walls, thinking about horses and choices, about two damaged people circling each other in a cabin at the edge of the world. The storm had passed outside, but something new was building in the space between them. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the knife beneath her pillow felt more like habit than necessity. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it arrived, it transformed the world overnight. Snow melted in rushing streams, revealing earth dark with promise. The air softened, carrying scents of pine sap and new growth, and on a morning when the sun painted the peaks gold, Eli led Annabelle behind the south ridge. Close your eyes, he said, the closest thing to playfulness she'd heard from him. She hesitated, old instincts flaring. Closed eyes meant vulnerability, meant, trust me. The words were quiet, without pressure. So she did, surprising herself. Let him guide her over uneven ground, his hand barely touching her elbow through her sleeve. When he stopped, she could smell something sweet on the warming air. Now look. She opened her eyes to a miracle. In a sheltered hollow between two rock faces, he'd carved out a garden. The soil was turned and ready, dark and rich. A small fence of woven branches would keep out rabbits and deer. But what stopped her breath were the flowers already blooming along one edge. Crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, their purple and yellow faces turned toward the sun. You did this? Her voice came out strangled. Started it last fall, before. He cleared his throat. Figured whoever answered the advertisement might want something pretty to look at, something that wasn't just survival. She walked the perimeter slowly, seeing the work in every detail. The rocks he'd hauled to form raised beds. The channel dug to direct snowmelt for irrigation. The care in choosing this spot, protected from wind but open to morning sun. For me? The words barely made it past the tightness in her throat. For you, if you stay. The qualification hung between them. 3 months since her arrival, and neither had mentioned the preacher who'd yet to make his circuit. Their arrangement remained undefined. She wasn't wife, wasn't exactly hired help anymore either. Something in between, something without a name. I don't know how to garden, she admitted. I'll teach you. My mother kept a garden back in Missouri. Before, he stopped, that familiar shuddering of his past. Before the war took everything. He picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers. But seeds don't care about before. They just grow. They spent the morning planning where the vegetables would go, which corner might suit herbs. Eli knew more than she'd expected about growing things. His large hands were gentle with the seed packets, his voice soft as he explained about soil and sun, about patience and faith in things unseen. "Why didn't you remarry?" she asked as they worked. 4 years is a long time. There must have been opportunities. He considered, using a stick to mark rows. Tried courting the school teacher in town for a spell. Nice woman, smart, but every time she laughed, all I could hear was what wasn't Mary's laugh. Didn't seem fair to either of us. So you advertised for a stranger instead. Seemed more honest, no pretending at something that wasn't there. Annabelle understood. The freedom of lowered expectations, of practical arrangements where hearts weren't required to perform on demand. "Is that what we have?" she asked. "Honesty?" He looked at her directly then, those stone-gray eyes thoughtful. "More than most, I reckon." They worked in companionable silence until the sun climbed high. When they returned to the cabin, Annabelle felt something had shifted. The garden was a promise, an investment in tomorrow. For the first time, she let herself think beyond the next meal, the next chore, the next sunrise, that afternoon. While Eli tended the horses, she began her own project. He'd taught her the basics of shooting over the winter, how to load and clean the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, but she wanted more, needed more. She set up targets against the barn wall, old cans and bottles. Her first shots went wild, the rifle's kick jarring her shoulder, but she adjusted, remembered his instructions about breathing, about squeezing not pulling. "Elbow higher." His voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "You're fighting the weight instead of using it." He moved beside her, demonstrating. "See, let the rifle settle into your shoulder. It's your partner, not your enemy." She tried again. The can spun off the fence post with a satisfying clang. Better. He studied her stance. Why the sudden interest in marksmanship? A woman alone needs to protect herself. You're not alone. The simple statement hung in the air. She lowered the rifle, meeting his gaze. "Aren't I?" Something flickered in his expression, hurt, maybe, or frustration. "No, Annabelle, you're not." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing with the rifle warm in her hands and confusion cold in her chest. That night, tension filled the cabin like smoke. They ate dinner in silence, the scrape of forks on tin plates unnaturally loud. Finally, Eli pushed back from the table. "I ever give you reason to fear me?" The question came rough, almost angry. Annabelle's hand stilled on the dishes she was clearing. "No." "Then why do you act like I'm fixing to turn into a monster? 3 months, and you still flinch when I walk past. Still keep that knife under your pillow. Yes, I know about it. Still plan escape routes every time you enter a room." Heat flooded her face. "Old habits? It's more than habit." He stood, pacing to the window. "I see how you watch me. Like you're waiting for the mask to slip. Like kindness is just the first stage of a trap. Because it usually is." The words exploded out of her. "In my experience, men who seem gentle are just better at hiding their cruelty. At least the obvious brutes are honest about what they want." He turned, and she saw real anger in his eyes for the first time. "I'm not him, not any of them. When are you going to see that? When are you going to understand that I can't afford to?" She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "You want trust? Faith? Those are luxuries for women who haven't learned the price of being wrong." "And what's the price of being right?" He moved closer, still maintaining distance but reducing it. "What's the cost of spending your whole life behind walls, jumping at shadows?" "Survival. That ain't living, Annabelle. That's just slower dying." They stood facing each other across the table, both breathing hard. In the lamplight, she could see the pulse beating in his throat, the tension in his jaw, but also the pain in his eyes, The weariness of offering patience and receiving suspicion. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I know." His anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. "Lord knows, I do. Just sometimes I wonder if trying's enough for either of us." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "I'll be in the barn." The cabin felt too empty without him. Annabelle finished the dishes mechanically, her mind churning. Was he right? Was she so trapped by fear that she couldn't see what was real anymore? She thought of the garden, the hours of work he'd put in for a woman he hadn't even met, the patient nights of her fever, the way he'd said good when she'd told him about defending herself. Small things, maybe, but they added up to something larger, a pattern of consideration that asked nothing in return. When an hour passed with no sign of his return, worry crept in. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset, and he'd left without gloves or a lantern. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, absently rubbing the nose of a bay mare. "You'll catch cold," she said from the doorway. "Been colder." She approached slowly, the way he'd taught her with skittish horses. The mare watched her with liquid eyes, but didn't shy away. "Her name's Buttercup," Eli said. "Mary named her. Said anything that's sweet-tempered deserved a pretty name." "She's beautiful." "She's pregnant. Should foal next month." He stroked the mare's neck. "Was thinking, if it's a filly, you could have her, raise her from the start. A horse that's yours alone might feel safer than borrowed trust." The gesture broke something in her chest. "Eli." "I know I'm not an easy man," he continued, not looking at her. "Don't talk much. Don't laugh enough. Got my own ghosts rattling around. But I'd never—" He stopped, jaw working. "What he did to you, what any of them did, I'd cut off my own hand before I'd raise it to you." "I know," she said, and realized she meant it. "I do know that. It's just—" "Knowing and feeling ain't the same thing." He finally looked at her. "I understand that. Just gets lonesome sometimes, living with a woman who looks at me like I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing." She moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold barn. "You're not a wolf." "No? Then what am I?" She thought about it, studying his face in the dim light, the lines carved by sun and sorrow, the careful hands gentle on the mare's neck, the eyes that held hurt but no cruelty. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'm trying to find out." He nodded slowly. "I suppose that's something." They stood together in the barn, watching Buttercup drowse. The moment stretched. Not quite comfortable, but no longer sharp with conflict. "Will you teach me?" Annabelle asked suddenly. "About horses, birthing foals, all of it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "If you want, though it's messy work, not pretty like gardening." "I'm not afraid of messy." "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose you are." They walked back to the cabin together. The tension between them eased, if not erased. At the door, Eli paused. "The rifle practice. I'll help, if you'll let me. Man never knows when his wife might need to defend the homestead." "Wife," the word hung between them, acknowledged for the first time in weeks. "The preacher will come when he comes, but far as I'm concerned, you've been earning the title since the day you arrived." He met her eyes steadily. "Unless you're planning to leave when the road's clear?" It was the closest he'd come to asking her to stay. Annabelle felt the weight of the moment, the choice being offered. Stay and be a true wife, with all that implied, or take the spring freedom and run again, always running. "The garden," she said finally. "I'd like to see what grows." He nodded, understanding. "Then we'll tend it together." Inside, as they prepared for sleep in their separate spaces, Annabelle found herself removing the knife from beneath her pillow. She held it for a long moment, this companion that had traveled so far with her. Then she wrapped it carefully and placed it in the bureau drawer. Not trust, not yet, but a step toward it. Through the thin wall, she heard Eli settling for the night. The familiar sounds no longer set her on edge. Instead, she found them oddly comforting, proof that she wasn't alone in the darkness, that someone stood watch without being asked. "Eli," she called softly. "Yeah?" Thank you for the garden. A pause, then, thank you for staying to see it. She smiled in the darkness, a real smile that no one could see. Outside, spring worked its quiet magic on the frozen earth. Inside, something similar was beginning to thaw. It would take time. Trust was not a crop that grew overnight, but seeds had been planted, and with patience and care, who knew what might bloom? The stranger appeared on a Tuesday, riding into town on a horse that had seen better days. Annabelle noticed him first through the general store window. Something about the way he sat his saddle, lazy and watchful at once, made her stomach clench with recognition. Mrs. McCall, young Tom Morrison called from behind the counter. You feeling all right? You've gone pale as milk. She forced herself to turn from the window, to smile at the boy. Just a touch of sun. I'll take the flour and coffee, please. But her hands shook as she counted out coins. The stranger had tied his horse outside the saloon, was studying the town with the calculating gaze of a hunter. She knew that look, had seen it in courthouse halls and train stations, always following, always searching. Eli waited with the wagon, reading a week-old newspaper someone had left at the postal window. He looked up as she approached, and his expression immediately sharpened. What's wrong? Nothing. Let's go. She climbed onto the bench, resisting the urge to look back, but Eli was already scanning the street, cataloging threats with the instinct of a man who'd survived his own share of trouble. His gaze settled on the saloon. Someone you know? No. The lie came too quick, too sharp. He studied her for a long moment, then clicked to the mules. They rode home in tense silence. That night, she hardly slept. Every creak of the cabin became footsteps. Every wind gust sounded like voices. When dawn finally came, she found Eli already dressed, checking his rifle. Going to town, he said shortly. Need to see about some things. Eli? Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. He was gone before she could protest, leaving her to pace the cabin like a caged animal. The morning stretched endless. She tried to work, mending, cooking, anything to occupy her hands, but her mind kept circling back to that familiar, lazy posture, that calculating gaze. When Eli finally returned near noon, his face was grim. His name's Jake Hollister. Been asking about a woman. Dark hair, tall, might be going by Rose. He set his rifle in its place with careful control. That ring any bells? She sank into a chair, legs suddenly water. He found me. Who is he? My husband's cousin. They were close as brothers. Ran the same circles. She pressed trembling hands against her skirts. He swore at the trial he'd see justice done. His kind of justice. Eli moved to the window, watching the road. How'd he track you here? I don't know. I was careful. Changed trains. Used different names. She stopped, remembering. The advertisement. I had to use Rose to claim the ticket you sent. He must have been checking marriage announcements, mail-order bride services. Smart. Eli's voice held grudging respect for the hunting skills. If not the hunter. Question is, what's he planning? They found out 3 days later. Annabelle was alone. Eli having ridden to check the fence line. When hoofbeats approached the cabin, she recognized the lazy rhythm even before she peered through the curtain to confirm her fears. Jake Hollister sat his horse in their yard like he owned it, taking in the cabin, the barn, the small signs of domestic life. When he dismounted, she saw the gun on his hip, the knife in his boot. Not a social call. Then she checked the rifle Eli had left loaded by the door, then opened it before Hollister could knock. No point pretending she wasn't home. Hello, Belle. He smiled, using the name Samuel had called her, the one that still made her skin crawl. Been a long ride finding you. I'm Annabelle McCall now. She kept her voice steady, her hand near the door frame where the rifle waited. And you're trespassing. Now that's unfriendly, after I came all this way to check on my cousin's widow. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. Wanted to make sure you were well cared for. Sam would have wanted that. Sam wanted a lot of things, most of them involving his fists. The smile flickered. You always were mouthy. He said it was part of your charm. Until it wasn't. What do you want, Jake? He leaned against the porch post, casual as a neighbor visiting. But she saw the tension in him, the readiness for violence. Justice. You killed a good man. Bell. Shot him in his own bed. I defended myself from a drunken animal. His face darkened. That's not how the family sees it. Not how the law would have seen it, if you hadn't run like the guilty woman you are. The law didn't care what Sam did to me for 2 years. Why would I trust it to care about one night? Because you took something that wasn't yours to take. He straightened, hand drifting toward his gun. Sam's life was worth more than yours. His family deserves satisfaction. Then they'll have to be disappointed. She heard it then, hoofbeats approaching fast. Eli must have seen Hollister's horse from the ridge. Jake heard it too, his hand settling on his pistol grip. This the new husband, the one fool enough to take in a murderess. Eli rounded the corner at a controlled canter, rifle across his saddle. He took in the scene with one sweep. Annabelle in the doorway. The stranger too close. The smell of trouble thick as smoke. You'd be off my land now, Eli said, not bothering with introductions. Jake turned, sizing up this new player. Your land, maybe, but she's family business. She's my wife. That makes her my business. Your wife's a killer. Friend. Shot her lawful husband while he slept. That sit well with you? Eli dismounted slowly, rifle still ready. Man raises his hand to a woman. He stops being lawful anything. Now I asked you polite to leave. And if I don't, then we'll explore other options. They faced each other, two men reading violence in stance and gaze. Annabelle watched, heart hammering, knowing how quickly such moments could turn deadly. Finally, Jake smiled that too-wide smile. No need for unpleasantness. I'll be staying in town a spell. Give you time to think on things. He looked past Eli to Annabelle. You can't run forever. Belle, Sam's family has long memories and deep pockets. We'll keep coming. He mounted his horse with insolent ease, tipping his hat. Ma'am, sir, I'll be seeing you. They watched him ride away, dust settling in his wake like a promise of storms to come. Only when he disappeared over the rise did Eli lower his rifle. Pack what you need, he said quietly. We're going to the Morrison place for a few days. I won't run again. The words came fierce, surprising her with their certainty. I'm done running. He turned to her, and she saw something new in his expression. Not pity or fear, but a hard determination that matched her own. Didn't say anything about running, but if there's going to be trouble, I want witnesses around. Tom Morrison's got 3 grown sons and no love for bullies. He climbed the steps, standing close enough that she could see the controlled anger in every line of his body. This Jake fellow, he's the type to prefer darkness and solitude for his work. She nodded, throat tight. Then we don't give him either. We stay visible, stay together, and make our stand in daylight if it comes to that. Eli, this isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. The vehemence startled them both. He took a breath, moderating his tone. You think I'd let him? Let anyone? He stopped, jaw working. I've brought danger to your door. You should send me away. Try to leave and I'll follow. He said it simple as stating the weather. You're my wife, Annabelle. Maybe not in the church's eyes yet, but in mine, in the only way that matters. She stared at him, this taciturn man who just declared war for her sake. Why? He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the land he'd worked alone for so long. Because you stayed through the winter. Because you planted seeds in that garden. Because when Buttercup foals, I want you there to see it. He met her eyes. Because I'm selfish enough to want a life with you more than I'm scared of what it might cost. The words undid her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting tears that wanted to fall. I won't let him hurt you, she whispered. Not you too, and I won't let him take you. He touched her shoulder, the first voluntary contact he'd initiated since her arrival. We face this together, or not at all. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses and strength. Together, then. They packed quickly, essentials only. including the rifle and extra ammunition. As they loaded the wagon, Eli asked quietly, "The knife you kept under your pillow, you still have it? In the drawer. Might want to bring it." She looked at him in surprise. He shrugged. Man should use all the tools available. Woman, too. She retrieved the knife, wrapping it carefully before tucking it into her travel bag. It felt different now. Not a fearful secret, but acknowledged protection. The Morrison Ranch sprawled across a valley 20 minutes away, bustling with the noise of a large family. Tom's mother, Ruth, took one look at their faces and ushered them inside without questions. "Trouble?" was all she asked Eli. "Maybe, man in town making threats against my wife." Ruth's face hardened. She'd buried a daughter years back, lost to a husband's temper. "Then you'll stay as long as needed. Tom and his brothers will be glad for something to do besides irritate each other." They were given a small room off the kitchen. That night, as Annabelle lay in the narrow bed listening to Eli's breathing from his pallet on the floor, she whispered into the darkness, "I'm scared." "I know." His voice came quiet and steady. "But you're not alone anymore. That's got to count for something. What if he... Then I'll stop him. Whatever it takes." She believed him. This man who'd been so careful with distance, so patient with her fears, had steel in him when it mattered. "Eli, when this is over, when we're safe..." "Yeah, I want to learn to be a real wife. Your wife. If you'll have me." The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Then, "I've been waiting for you since the day you stepped off that train. I'll wait as long as it takes." She closed her eyes, holding those words close. Outside, danger circled like a patient predator. But inside, for the first time in years, she felt the beginning of something that might be safety. Not in walls or weapons, but in the simple promise of another person willing to stand between her and harm. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she wasn't facing it alone. Spring bloomed in earnest while they stayed at the Morrison Ranch. The week stretched into 2 as Jake Hollister lingered in town, a constant shadow on their peace. But in the safety of the bustling household, something else bloomed between Eli and Annabelle, tender as the garden seeds they'd planted, and just as determined to grow. It started small. A shared glance over breakfast when young Tom made a joke. Eli's hand steadying her elbow as they walked to check on Buttercup, who'd been brought to the Morrison barn. The way he automatically left the chair closest to the door for her at meals, understanding her need for escape routes, even in safety. "You two are good together," Ruth Morrison observed one evening. Watching them work side by side mending harnesses, got that quiet understanding some couples take decades to find. Annabelle felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're still learning each other." "Best kind of learning there is." Ruth's eyes held knowing warmth. "My Herbert and I, we had fire from the start. Burned hot, burned out quick. But what you two have, that's the slow-building kind. Lasts longer." That night, unable to sleep, Annabelle found Eli on the porch, keeping watch though the Morrison boys had promised a patrol. "Can't rest?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench. "Habit." He shifted slightly, making room for her. "Keep thinking about Hollister out there, planning God knows what. I'm sorry I brought this to you. Stop apologizing for other men's evil." His voice carried an edge of frustration. "You didn't make him hunt you, didn't make your husband what he was." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead. The night was warm, scented with apple blossoms from Ruth's orchard. "Tell me about before," Annabelle said suddenly. "Before the war, before Mary. Who were you?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Farm boy from Missouri, youngest of 4 brothers. Thought I'd work the land like my father. Marry a neighbor girl, raise babies and corn in equal measure. What changed? War came. I was 17, full of fool notions about glory, enlisted with my brothers." His voice went flat. "Came back alone." She found his hand in the darkness, laced her fingers through his. He stiffened at first, then relaxed, gripping back with careful strength. After that, home didn't fit anymore. Too many ghosts in the fields. Headed west. Learned horses and cattle. Tried to outrun the dreams. A pause. Met Mary in Kansas. She was sunshine. Pure sunshine. Made me believe I could be whole again. You loved her very much. I did, different from what I feel. He stopped abruptly. What you feel now? She prompted softly. He turned their joined hands over, studying them in the moonlight. Mary was my attempt to go back, to be that farm boy who believed in simple things. But I wasn't him anymore. He looked at her directly. What I feel for you is, after, it knows what the world can do. It's chosen anyway. The words hung between them, profound and terrifying. Annabelle felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from something else entirely. I don't know how to be loved, she whispered. Not the real way, not without paying for it. Then we'll learn together. He lifted their joined hands, pressed his lips to her knuckles, the first kiss between them. If you'll let me. Before she could respond, hoofbeats shattered the moment. One of the Morrison boys galloped into the yard, yanking his horse to a stop. Fire! He shouted. The McCall place! The whole barn's ablaze! Eli was running before the words finished. Annabelle close behind. They saddled horses with desperate efficiency. Ruth calling warnings about ambush that neither heeded. The ride back seemed endless, though they pushed the horses hard. Long before they arrived, they could see the orange glow painting the sky. Smoke rolled black against the stars. The barn was fully engulfed when they thundered into the yard. Eli leaped from his horse, but Tom Morrison caught his arm. Too late, the whole thing's coming down. Buttercup? Eli fought against the restraining hands. We got her out, Tom assured him. Soon as we saw the smoke, she's tied behind the cabin with the other horses. But Eli, there's more. That's when Annabelle saw it, painted on the cabin wall in red. Murderers burn. Jake Hollister had made his statement. Eli stood staring at the message, fists clenched, while his barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. 4 years of work. Feed for the winter. Tools accumulated over a lifetime. Gone. I'll kill him. The words came quiet and certain. No. Annabelle moved between him and the burning building. That's what he wants. You arrested or dead. Me, unprotected. He burned my barn, threatened my wife. And killing him makes you hang. Then where am I? She gripped his arms, feeling the trembling rage in his muscles. We do this legal, in daylight, together. The next hours blurred together. Neighbors arrived, forming bucket brigades that saved the cabin and smaller outbuildings. Sheriff Watson from town took statements, studied the painted threat with professional disgust. Jake Hollister was drinking in the saloon until an hour ago, he reported. Plenty of witnesses. Claims he don't know nothing about fires. Of course he does. Annabelle's voice was bitter. Knowing and proving are different things. Watson spat tobacco juice. But this is clear threat against you folks. I can run him out of town if you want. So he can come back later? Eli shook his head. No, this ends now. Dawn found them salvaging what they could from the ashes. The barn was total loss. But the root cellar had survived, along with most of the tools stored there. Neighbors brought offerings, hay for the horses, lumber for rebuilding, casseroles from the women. Jake Hollister arrived with the morning sun, riding up bold as brass. Heard you had some trouble, he called, not bothering to dismount. Shame about the barn. Man works hard building something. Hate to see it destroyed. Eli started forward, but Annabelle caught his arm. Let me. She walked toward Hollister, stopping just out of reach. The knife was in her boot. Eli had insisted. But her weapons today would be words. You've had your say. Jake, made your point. Now hear mine. Her voice carried clear in the morning air. I killed Samuel Rose, shot him when he came at me drunk and mean one time too many. I'd do it again to save my life. Hollister's face darkened. You admit it then? I admit to surviving, to defending myself against a man who broke my ribs, blackened my eyes, and worse. She felt Eli behind her. Close, but not touching. If Samuel's family wants justice, let them think on the justice he denied me for 2 years. He was blood. He was a monster. She stepped closer, saw Hollister's hand twitch toward his gun. And you're cut from the same cloth, hiding behind family honor to justify your love of hurting women. You lying? Ask in St. Louis about Jake Hollister. Ask about the working girls who won't take his custom anymore. Ask why Samuel always brought you along when he went looking for entertainment. It was a guess, but his face told her she'd hit truth. Behind her, she heard Eli shift. Ready. Here's what happens now, she continued. You leave today. Don't come back, because if you do, I won't be the one you face. My husband will meet you, legal and proper, and put you in the ground. Your husband? Hollister sneered. This worn-out soldier who can't even protect his barn? This man who chose to save lives instead of taking one in the dark, like a coward. She smiled, cold as winter. Yes, my husband, who'll face you whenever you're ready to stop burning barns and threatening women. The challenge hung in the air. Hollister looked from her to Eli, calculating odds. Noon, Eli said quietly. Main Street. If you've got courage to match your mouth, I don't duel with, then get out of Wyoming. Eli's voice carried no heat, just implacable certainty. Because every day you remain is another chance for you to threaten my wife. I won't allow that. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. You all heard it. Fair challenge. Fairly given, noon today. Or Mr. Hollister finds himself unwelcome in my jurisdiction. Hollister's face worked through rage, calculation, and finally something like fear. He'd expected to terrorize a lone woman, not face a man with killing experience and nothing left to lose. This isn't over, he spat finally, wheeling his horse. Noon, Eli repeated. They watched him gallop away, dust and threats in his wake. You can't, Annabelle whispered when he was gone. I won't have your blood on my conscience, too. Rather have yours on mine. Eli turned to her, and she saw the soldier he'd been, hard and dangerous when cornered. He won't stop. Annabelle, men like him never do. Either I end it today, or we spend our lives looking over shoulders. She wanted to argue, but truth was a stone in her throat. Jake wouldn't stop, would follow them wherever they ran, patient as a hunter, cruel as winter. Then I'm coming with you. No. Yes. She matched his stubborn tone. We face things together. You said so. The morning passed too quickly. Ruth Morrison arrived with several women, clucking over Annabelle like protective hens. But she refused to be corralled inside, insisted on standing where she could see Main Street from the Morrisons' wagon. The town gathered as word spread. There was no love for Jake Hollister, who'd made himself unwelcome in just a week with rough behavior and rougher talk. But a duel was rare entertainment, and blood drew crowds regardless of righteousness. Eli stood calm at one end of the street, coat pushed back to show his holstered pistol. He'd cleaned his weapon with methodical care, then kissed Annabelle once, brief and fierce, before walking to his position. High noon. Jake appeared, trying for swagger but achieving only nerves. He'd been drinking. Not enough to impair, just enough for courage. Sheriff Watson stood between them. This can still be avoided. Mr. Hollister, you can apologize and leave town peaceful. I don't apologize to murderers or their whores. A murmur ran through the crowd. Annabelle felt Ruth's restraining hand on her arm. Then take your positions, Watson said with disgust. On my count. First man to clear leather and fire. They faced each other down the dusty street. Eli stood relaxed, hand loose at his side. Jake shifted, sweating despite the mild day. 1. Annabelle's heart thundered. She thought of the garden waiting at home, seeds planted in hope of tomorrow. 2. She saw Jake's hand twitch, telegraphing intent. Eli remained still as stone. 3. Jake went for his gun, fast, but not fast enough. Eli's weapon cleared leather in one smooth motion, the shot cracking sharp in the noon air. Jake Hollister spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. His pistol tumbled into the dust, unfired. Eli walked forward, weapon still ready. But Jake only writhed on the ground, cursing and bleeding. "You could have killed me," he gasped. "Could have." Eli stood over him, implacable. "But my wife asked me to do this legal. So you'll live, and you'll leave, and you'll never come back. Because next time, I won't aim for your shoulder." Sheriff Watson knelt beside Jake, checking the wound. "Clean through. You'll heal, if infection doesn't take you." He looked up at Eli. "Well done. Fair fight. Fairly won." The crowd began dispersing. Excitement over. Men clapped Eli's back as he passed. Women nodded approval to Annabelle. She met him in the street, not caring who watched. "You aimed for his shoulder. You asked me not to kill him." He holstered his weapon with steady hands. "I keep my promises, even when it risks your life. Especially then." He touched her face, gentle as he'd been with Buttercup. Ready to go home. Home, their smoke-damaged cabin, barnless yard, an uncertain future. But theirs. "Yes," she said, and meant it wholly. They rode back together on one horse, her arms around his waist, feeling his solid warmth. The fear that had lived in her chest for months was quieting, replaced by something new. Not safety. The frontier offered no guarantees, but partnership, trust, the beginning of love that knew the cost and chose anyway. That night, as they sat by their own fire in their own home, Annabelle made her own choice. "Eli?" He looked up from the harness he was mending. I want—" She stopped, gathered courage. "I want to be your wife. Truly. If you still—" He set aside the leather, crossed to kneel before her chair. "I've wanted you since you stepped off that train, scared and proud and ready to fight the world." He took her hands, calloused thumbs stroking her knuckles. "Question is, do you want me, not from gratitude or obligation, but real wanting?" She studied his face, weathered and scarred, but dear to her now. Thought of his patience, his protection, his refusal to let her face darkness alone. "Yes," she whispered. "I want you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, giving her room to pull away. Instead, she leaned in, hands tangling in his hair. The kiss deepened, weeks of careful distance dissolving like spring snow. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "Preachers due next week," he murmured. "Too long to wait." His eyes widened. She smiled, feeling bold and sure for the first time in memory. "We've done everything backwards already. What's one more broken convention?" He laughed, the first full laugh she'd heard from him. Annabelle rose. "You're going to be the death of me." "No," she said seriously. "I'm going to be the life of you, as you are mine." They came together in the flickering firelight, careful and passionate by turns. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and wild. But inside their small cabin, two wounded souls found healing in each other's arms, building something new from the ashes of all they'd lost. The sickness started as morning queasiness that Annabelle attributed to the lingering smoke smell from the barn fire. For a week, she pushed through it, helping Eli and the neighbors raise the frame of a new barn. But when she fainted while hanging laundry, nearly falling into the washtub, she could no longer ignore what her body was trying to tell her. She sat on the porch step, head between her knees, as the truth settled over her like a familiar dress, one she'd never expected to wear again. After Samuel's brutality, the doctor in St. Louis had been grimly clear about her prospects for motherhood. "Unlikely," he'd said, cataloging her injuries with clinical detachment. "The damage is considerable." Yet here she sat, counting weeks and recognizing signs she'd thought lost to her forever. "Annabelle?" Eli emerged from the new barn, sawdust in his hair, concern creasing his face. "Tom Morrison said you took ill." "I'm fine." The automatic response, born of years of hiding weakness. He crouched before her, studying her pallor with worried eyes. "You're not fine. Been pale for days. Not eating right. Should I fetch Doc Harper from town?" "No." The word came sharper than intended. She softened it with a wan smile. Just tired from all the work. I'll rest. But rest brought no relief from the churning certainty in her belly, half hope, half terror. A baby. Eli's baby. The impossible made possible, growing inside her scarred body. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until she was sure. And maybe not even then. What if she lost it? What if her damaged body couldn't carry to term? He'd already lost one wife and child. She wouldn't watch hope dawn in his eyes only to extinguish it with her body's failure. So she kept her secret through the blazing days of summer, hiding morning sickness as summer flu, attributing exhaustion to the hard work of rebuilding. The new barn rose sturdy and strong, better than the old. The garden flourished, tomatoes hanging heavy on the vine, beans climbing their poles with determined growth. And inside her, another kind of growth continued, defying medical predictions. The preacher had come and gone, making their union official in the eyes of God and law. It had been a simple ceremony in the cabin, Ruth Morrison and her boys as witnesses. Eli had surprised her with a ring, a thin gold band he'd bought on a cattle drive years ago, waiting for the right reason to use it. Now that ring caught the light as she worked, a constant reminder that she was truly wife, not just woman passing through, which made her secret heavier. Wives weren't supposed to hide things from husbands. But wives also weren't supposed to bring such cruel hope to men who'd already grieved enough. By the time the leaves began to turn, her body was getting harder to hide. She took to wearing her loosest dresses, claiming the need for comfort in the lingering heat. But Eli wasn't a fool. She caught him watching her with puzzled concern, noting her careful movements, her sudden aversions to certain smells. The breaking point came on a crystalline September morning. Buttercup had foaled in the night, a beautiful filly with her mother's gentle eyes and a coat like burnished copper. Eli had stayed with the mare through her labor, and Annabelle had meant to join him, but her own body had other plans. She made it as far as the barn door before the now familiar nausea struck. This time, there was no hiding it. She retched into the bushes, legs shaking, as the world spun in lazy circles. Strong arms caught her as she swayed. "That's it," Eli said firmly. "Doc Harper, today." "No, Annabelle." He turned her to face him, and she saw fear stark in his eyes. "Please, you've been sick for weeks, getting thinner when you should be thriving. I can't." His voice broke. "I can't lose you too." The naked pain in his voice undid her. Here was a man who'd faced down gunmen for her, who'd rebuilt a burnt barn without complaint, brought low by the thought of her illness. "You're not losing me," she whispered. "Then tell me what's wrong." She looked at this man who'd given her safety, patience, and love without condition, who'd waited for her to come to him, never pushing, never demanding, who deserved truth even if it ended in heartbreak. "I think—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I think I'm carrying your child." The words hung between them like morning mist. Eli's face went through a series of expressions, shock, confusion, and then something so tender it made her chest tight. He couldn't finish. His hands moved to her shoulders, holding her like spun glass. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for weeks, but I was afraid." "Afraid?" His brow furrowed. "Of me?" "Of hope." The admission came on a sob. "The doctor in St. Louis said that Samuel's violence had left too much damage, and even if somehow I conceived, carrying to term would be—" She gestured helplessly. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed swiftly by protective fury. "He hurt you that badly?" "Among other things." She couldn't meet his gaze. "I should have told you before that night. You deserve a wife who can give you children without question." "Stop." He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. "I deserve the wife I have, the one who fought through hell to find me. If we have children, that's a gift. If we don't, you're gift enough. But if I lose it, then we'll grieve together. But Annabelle, you can't face this alone, not anymore." She crumbled then, weeks of secret fear pouring out in tears. He held her, rocking slightly, murmuring comfort against her hair. "Doc Harper," he said when her sobs quieted. "Today, we need to know what to expect, how to keep you safe. What if he says it's too dangerous? Then we'll face that too. Together." Doc Harper was a thin man with gentle hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He examined Annabelle thoroughly while Eli paced the porch like a caged wolf. "Well," the doctor said finally, washing his hands in the basin, "you're definitely with child, about 3 months along, I'd say." "And the damage?" Annabelle forced herself to ask. "From before." His expression grew serious. "There's scarring. Yes, the pregnancy will need careful monitoring. Bed rest in the final months. Most likely. But Mrs. McCall, I've seen worse cases carry to term. Your body's already done the hardest part, conceiving and holding on this long." Hope, that dangerous flower, bloomed in her chest. So it's possible. Possible. Yes, guaranteed. No. He turned to include Eli, who'd appeared in the doorway. "She'll need good nutrition, minimal heavy work, and someone to watch for warning signs. Any bleeding, severe pain, or early contractions, you send for me immediately." Eli nodded, absorbing instructions like battle orders. His hand found Annabelle's, gripping tight. "I'll want to see her monthly," Doc Harper continued. "More often as the time approaches. And Mrs. McCall, no more hiding symptoms. Your health matters more than false bravery." After the doctor left, they sat together in stunned silence. The cabin felt different somehow, fuller with possibility and fear in equal measure. "A baby," Eli said wonderingly. "Our baby. If I can carry it." The doubt crept back, insidious as smoke. "You will." He knelt before her chair, hands spanning her still flat belly with infinite care. "You're the strongest woman I know. If anyone can do this, it's you. And if I can't, if history repeats?" His jaw tightened, but his touch remained gentle. "Then I'll be here to hold you through it. But Annabelle, what if it doesn't? What if this child is as stubborn as its mother? What if we get to meet him or her come spring? Spring, the garden would be blooming again. New life everywhere." "Her," Annabelle said softly. "I think it's a girl." "Yeah?" A smile broke across his face, transforming the harsh lines. "A daughter. Lord help us all." That night, he insisted she take the bed while he made a pallet by the fire, but sleep eluded her, mind churning with possibilities. "Near midnight," she called softly. "Eli? Can't sleep? Would you lie with me, just to hold me?" She heard him rise, felt the bed dip as he settled beside her, carefully maintaining distance until she curled against him. His arm came around her, hand splaying protectively over where their child grew. "Scared?" he murmured into her hair. "Terrified. Me too." The admission surprised her. But it's good fear, the kind that means something matters. They lay together in the darkness, feeling the weight of change settling over them. Outside, an owl called across the valley. Inside, new life grew despite all odds, defying prediction and past pain. "I want to write to my mother," Annabelle said suddenly. "Tell her everything. Maybe invite her to visit, if she's willing." "Of course. Family should know about family." Family. The word sat strange and wonderful on her tongue. For so long, she'd been alone, running from the past with no thought of future. Now she lay in the arms of a man who'd chosen her, broken pieces and all, with their child growing between them. What if I'm not a good mother? The fear slipped out before she could catch it. What if I don't know how to be gentle, only how to survive? Eli's arm tightened around her. "You were gentle with Buttercup during her labor, gentle with the garden seedlings, gentle with me when the nightmares come." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've got more tenderness in you than you know. Just been keeping it safe until you found somewhere to let it bloom." She turned in his arms, finding his mouth in the darkness. The kiss was different now, not desperate with passion, but deep with promise. When they parted, she whispered against his lips, "I love you. I should have said it before, but I love you." "Been waiting to hear that," he admitted, Love you too. Have since you told that lying preacher you'd take me for better or worse. That wasn't a lie. No, he agreed. Just took us a while to find our way to better. The next days passed in adjustment. True to his word. Eli took over the heavier chores, enlisting Tom Morrison's help despite Annabelle's protests. She found herself relegated to light work, mending, cooking, tending the garden, and chafed at the restrictions even as she understood their necessity. Letters flew back and forth to St. Louis. Her mother's response came tear-stained but joyful, full of forgiveness and plans to visit as soon as the railroad allows. For the first time in years, Annabelle felt the possibility of reconciliation, of family extending beyond the walls of their cabin. The pregnancy progressed with cautious optimism. Doc Harper visited monthly, pronouncing each time that things looked as well as could be expected. Annabelle grew rounder, movements careful but spirit undaunted. The baby kicked and rolled, making her presence known with increasing vigor. "She's strong," Annabelle would say, hand on her swelling belly, "like her mother." Eli would answer, covering her hand with his. But underneath the hope lurked fear, sharp as winter wind. Every twinge brought panic. Every too quiet moment sent her searching for movement. She'd wake gasping from dreams of blood and loss, only to find Eli's steady presence anchoring her to the present. "We're going to make it," he'd whisper in the darkness. "All three of us." And slowly, carefully, she began to believe him. The impossible had already happened. She'd conceived when doctors said she couldn't, found love when she'd thought herself too broken for it. Maybe, just maybe, this last impossible thing could happen too. A healthy child, a living child, their daughter, born into a world where she was wanted, protected, already loved beyond measure. It was, Annabelle thought as autumn painted the mountains gold, worth any amount of fear to reach for that hope. The trouble started at the harvest dance. October had painted the valley in shades of gold and rust, and the Morrison family had organized their annual celebration. The new barn stood proud against the sky, and despite her expanding middle, Annabelle had insisted on attending. Just for an hour, she'd promised Eli, who watched her with the protective concern that had become his constant companion. "I need to see people, to feel part of the community." He'd relented, as she'd known he would, these past months, as her belly grew round with their child. He'd denied her nothing within reason, but his eyes remained watchful as they entered the Morrison barn, transformed with lanterns and autumn leaves into something magical. The music was lively, fiddles and guitars filling the air with joy. Neighbors greeted them warmly, the women fussing over Annabelle's condition with knowing smiles. For a precious moment, she felt normal, just another rancher's wife expecting a child, welcomed and belonging. Then Martha Hensley arrived. The woman swept in like winter wind, elegant in store-bought silk despite the rustic setting. She'd moved to town recently, the widow of a mine owner, and carried herself with the authority of money and position. Her gaze found Annabelle across the crowded barn, and something sharp flickered in her expression. "So you're the notorious Mrs. McCall," Martha said, gliding over with practiced grace. "I've heard so much about you." Annabelle's hand found Eli's arm. "I'm sure you have. Oh, yes, Jake Hollister was quite vocal about your history before he left town." Martha's smile could have cut glass. "Murder makes for such interesting conversation, don't you think?" The music seemed to falter. Conversations nearby stuttered to a halt. "What happened in St. Louis is no secret," Eli said evenly. "My wife defended herself. The matter's closed." "Is it?" Martha's gaze dropped to Annabelle's swollen belly. "I do hope violent tendencies don't run in families. For the child's sake." The words hit like physical blows. Annabelle felt the blood drain from her face, her hand protective over her middle where their daughter tumbled, oblivious to the cruelty above. "Martha?" Ruth Morrison appeared like an avenging angel, sturdy and stern. "That's enough. You're in my home, at my invitation. You'll keep a civil tongue or leave. I'm merely expressing concern." Martha protested with false innocence. After all, we should know what kind of people we're welcoming into our community, what kind of mothers are raising the next generation, the kind who survive, Annabelle said quietly. Every eye turned to her. She lifted her chin, finding strength in Eli's solid presence beside her, the kind who refuse to die quietly to preserve others' comfort. If that makes me notorious, so be it. Brave words from a killer, Martha sneered. Careful words from a survivor, Annabelle corrected. And if you think I'll apologize for living when a man tried to kill me, you'll be disappointed. I am what I am, a woman who fought back. My child will know their mother's strength, not her shame. Your child will know their mother's reputation, Martha shot back. Whispered about, pointed at, carrying the weight of blood. Enough! Eli's voice cracked like a whip. He stepped forward, and Martha actually retreated. You've said your piece. Now hear mine. My wife is under my protection. Our child is under my protection. You spread poison about either, and you'll answer to me, legal and proper, as my wife prefers. But answer you will. The barn had gone completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. In that hush, another voice spoke. I'd like to share something. Old Agnes Wheeler pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on her cane. At 90, she was Frontier's oldest resident, sharp as a new blade despite her years. 40 years back, my first husband took to beating me, broke my arm twice, my ribs more times than I could count. She paused, ancient eyes finding Annabelle's. One night, he came at me with a fireplace poker. I hit him with a cast iron pan, killed him dead. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sheriff back then. He looked at my bruises, looked at that poker, and ruled it self-defense. I married his deputy 2 years later, had 4 children, been part of this community ever since. Agnes turned her basilisk gaze on Martha. You want to talk about killers? Girl, half the women in this room have blood on their hands, from defending themselves, their children, their homes. That's the price of frontier life. We don't apologize for surviving, and we don't tolerate those who'd shame us for it. Here, here, another woman called out. Clara Banks, the blacksmith's wife. My sister shot a man trying to steal her daughter. My neighbor killed a drunk who broke into her home. You want to call us all murderers? Mrs. Hensley? The tide had turned. Women throughout the barn began sharing stories, quiet admissions of violence done in defense, of choices made in desperation. The men stood silent, some surprised, others grimly knowing. Martha Hensley looked around, finding no allies in the crowd. Her face flushed ugly red. This is barbaric, uncivilized. I'll be speaking to the town council about the element being allowed. You do that, Ruth Morrison said pleasantly. My husband chairs the council. I'm sure he'll be interested in your views on which tax-paying, law-abiding citizens deserve to be part of our community. Beaten, Martha fled, her silk skirts whisking against the barn floor. A moment of awkward silence followed. Then old Agnes cackled. Music, she commanded. This is a harvest dance, not a funeral. The fiddles resumed, tentative at first, then with growing enthusiasm. People began to move again, conversations restarting. But Annabelle stood frozen, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. Come on, Eli murmured. Let's get some air. He guided her outside, where the October night was crisp and clear. She leaned against the barn wall, hands shaking. All those women, she whispered. All those stories. You're not alone, he said simply. Never were, really. Just took Martha's poison to bring it to light. What if she's right, though? What if our daughter does suffer for what I've done? Then we'll teach her what Agnes taught this town tonight, that surviving isn't shameful, that protecting yourself is human right. He cupped her face gently. Our daughter will know her mother's courage. That's gift, not burden. Before she could respond, a commotion arose from the road, riders approaching fast, too fast for social calls. Eli's hand went to his gun as Sheriff Watson galloped into view. McCall, the sheriff reined up hard. Need you and any men you can gather. Stage got hit about 10 miles north. Passengers are hurt. One bad. Doc Harper's already heading out. Indians. someone asked. Bandits, 3 of them, armed and mean. Watson's face was grim. They headed into the canyons, but we need to see to the wounded first. Eli was already moving. I'll get my rifle. No. Annabelle caught his arm. You can't. I have to. He gripped her shoulders gently. Those people need help. This is what neighbors do. She wanted to argue, to rail against the unfairness of it, but she saw the determination in his eyes, the echo of the soldier he'd been. This was who he was, a protector, a man who ran toward trouble when others needed aid. Be careful, she whispered. Always am. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. Tom Morrison will see you home. Lock the doors. I'll be back by dawn. Then he was gone, joining the stream of men heading for horses and weapons. Ruth Morrison appeared at Annabelle's elbow. Come inside, dear. No use watching them ride off. But Annabelle stood rooted, one hand on her belly, watching until the riders disappeared into darkness. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Your father's a good man, she murmured. Brave and stupid in equal measure. The wait was agony. Ruth tried to distract her with tea and conversation, but Annabelle could only pace, wearing grooves in the Morrisons' parlor rug. Other women gathered, wives and mothers wearing the same tight expression, the same forced calm. Near midnight, young Tom Morrison burst through the door. They're coming back! I can see the torches! The women flooded onto the porch. A grim procession wound up the road, riders surrounding a commandeered wagon. Annabelle searched desperately for Eli's familiar form. There, riding alongside the wagon, hatless but whole. Relief nearly buckled her knees. The wounded were carried into the Morrison house, a traveling salesman with a bullet in his shoulder, a woman with a gashed forehead, and worst, a young boy barely breathing, blood soaking through makeshift bandages. Doc Harper worked with grim efficiency, the women assisting where they could. Annabelle found herself holding the injured woman's hand as Doc cleaned her wound. My son, the woman kept saying. Please, my son. Doc's doing everything he can, Annabelle soothed, though her own heart clenched at the boy's still form. Eli appeared at her shoulder, clothes dusty but unbloodied. You shouldn't be doing this, the strain. I'm sitting and holding a hand, she said firmly. I've been through worse. The hours blurred together. Doc Harper fought for the boy's life with everything he had, but as dawn grayed the windows, he stepped back, shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The damage was too great. The mother's wail cut through the room like a blade. Annabelle held her as she sobbed, feeling the woman's agony echo in her own chest, so easily. It could be her crying over Eli, or someday, God forbid, their own child. The men who did this, she asked Eli quietly, got away, for now. His jaw was tight. But we know who they are. Justice will come. Justice. The word sat heavy between them. Annabelle thought of Martha Hensley's accusations, of the violence that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Now here it was again, touching lives around her. They buried the boy 2 days later. Half the town attended, standing silent in the small cemetery as his mother wept over the small pine box. Annabelle stood with the other women, her hand protective over her own child, thinking of all the ways the frontier could steal what you loved. That night, as she and Eli lay together in their bed, she voiced the fear that had been growing since the dance. What if I can't protect her, our daughter? What if the world's too cruel, too violent? Then we teach her to be strong, Eli said, like her mother, like all those women in the barn who survived whatever came at them. I don't want her to have to survive. I want her to just live. In a perfect world. Yes, but this isn't perfect world. He pulled her closer. It's a world where bandits rob stages and boys die too young. But it's also a world where neighbors ride to help strangers, where women like Agnes Wheeler speak truth to power, where someone like you can kill in self-defense and still be welcomed at harvest dances. Martha Hensley didn't welcome me. Martha Hensley's a fool, and alone in her foolishness, as she learned. Annabelle was quiet. feeling their daughter move within her. This child would be born into a hard world. Yes, but also into a community that understood necessity, that judged by present actions more than past sins. "I want to help that woman," she said suddenly. "The mother who lost her boy. I know what it's like to lose everything." "Then we'll help," Eli agreed. Together. The next morning, they loaded the wagon with food, firewood, and a quilt Annabelle had been making for their own child. The woman, her name was Sarah Patterson, met them with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you," she managed. "No thanks needed," Annabelle said. "Just passing along kindness that was shown to me when I needed it." They sat with Sarah through the morning, helping with chores, listening when she needed to talk about her son. When they left, Sarah caught Annabelle's hands. "Mrs. McCall, I heard what that woman said at the dance, about you being—" She swallowed. "My husband hit me. For years, I used to pray he'd die, imagine ways I might, but I never had the courage. You did what I couldn't. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of that." Annabelle squeezed her hands. "Surviving isn't about courage. It's about opportunity. When mine came, I took it. That's all." Riding home, Eli reached over to take her hand. "You did good today. I just remembered what it was like, being alone with grief." She looked at their joined hands, his scarred from work and war, hers roughened by lie and labor. "I'm not alone anymore." "No," he agreed. "And neither is she. That's how we make the world better for our daughter, not by removing all danger, but by making sure no one faces it alone." That night, as autumn wind rattled the windows, Annabelle felt something shift inside her. Not the baby, that movement she knew well now. This was deeper, a settling of spirit. She'd killed to survive, that was fact, unchangeable. But she'd also loved, helped, been welcomed despite her past. Martha Hensley's poison had meant to isolate her. Instead, it had revealed how many others shared her scars, her choices, her refusal to die quietly. Their daughter would be born into this complex world, violent and kind, cruel and supportive. She would know her mother had blood on her hands, but she would also know that those same hands had held the grieving, helped the needy, loved without reservation. It wasn't perfect, but it was human, and it was enough. The first real pains came with the spring thaw, as if the baby knew the world was ready to receive her. Annabelle had been tending the garden, their garden, now flourishing in its second year, when the cramping started. Low and insistent. "Just practice," she told herself, breathing through the tightness. Doc Harper had warned her about false labor, but when her water broke, soaking through her skirts into the dark soil, she knew this was real. "Eli!" Her voice carried across the yard to where he was mending fence. He dropped everything, running with the urgency of a man who'd been waiting for this moment with equal parts joy and terror. "Is it time?" She gripped his arm as another wave hit. "Get Ruth Morrison and Doc Harper. I'm not leaving you. Go!" The command came out sharper than intended, softened by her next words. "I'll be in the house. Our daughter's decided to make her entrance." He kissed her fiercely, then ran for his horse. Annabelle made her way inside, each step careful and deliberate. The cabin felt different somehow, charged with possibility, as if the very walls knew they were about to shelter new life. She'd prepared for this. Clean linens waited in the bedroom. Water stood ready to boil. Everything organized for a moment she'd feared might never come. Another contraction rolled through her, stronger than before. She gripped the bedpost, breathing as Doc Harper had taught her. Outside. She heard hoofbeats fading as Eli raced for help. The hours that followed blurred together, pain and pressure. Ruth's calm voice coaching her through each wave. Doc Harper's steady presence. Eli hovered until Ruth banished him to the main room. "Men got no business in birthing rooms," she declared. "They just fret and faint." But Annabelle could hear him pacing, wearing grooves in the floor as surely as she'd done waiting for his return from the stage robbery. The connection comforted her, both of them walking their worry, just a wall apart. "You're doing fine," Doc Harper assured her as afternoon bled into evening. "Baby's positioned well. Your body knows what to do." Her body, the same one Samuel had tried to break, that the St. Louis doctor had declared too damaged for this very act, yet here she was, bringing life into the world through sheer determination and biological miracle. "I can see the head," Ruth announced. "Dark hair like her papa. Come on now. One more push." Annabelle bore down with everything she had, a sound escaping her that was part battle cry, part prayer. Then, a sensation of release, followed by the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. A baby's cry, strong and indignant. "A girl," Doc Harper confirmed, his professional mask slipping to reveal a genuine smile, healthy and perfect. They placed the baby on Annabelle's chest, still slippery and squalling. She was tiny but fierce, fists waving in protest at this bright, cold world. Annabelle touched the dark fuzz on her head, counted tiny fingers and toes, marveled at the reality of her. "Eli," she whispered. "He needs to—" But he was already there, Ruth having relented at the baby's first cry. He approached the bed like a man walking into church, reverent and amazed. "Our daughter," Annabelle said, shifting so he could see better. "Say hello to Hope." The name had come to her during labor, between the pain and pushing. Hope, for all they'd survived to reach this moment, for all they dared dream might follow. Eli's hand shook as he touched the baby's cheek. "She's beautiful. Perfect. Lord, Annabelle, she's real." "Very real," she agreed, wincing as Doc Harper tended to the aftermath of birth. "And apparently blessed with her father's stubborn streak, given how she announced herself." They laughed, exhausted, overwhelmed, but genuinely happy. Ruth bustled about, cleaning and organizing with the efficiency of a woman who'd attended dozens of births. Doc Harper pronounced both mother and child in good health, though he warned Annabelle to rest and recover properly. "No heavy work for at least a month," he ordered. "Let others help." For once, she didn't argue. She was too lost in studying Hope's face, the way her tiny mouth worked even in sleep, the delicate shells of her ears, the grip of fingers that would someday be strong. Word spread quickly, as news did in their small community. By the next day, visitors began arriving. Sarah Patterson brought a knitted blanket, tears in her eyes as she held Hope. "She's blessed to have you both," she whispered. Agnes Wheeler hobbled in with her cane and sharp tongue. "Good lungs on that one. She'll need them in this world." But her ancient hands were gentle as she blessed the baby with words in a language Annabelle didn't recognize. Even Martha Hensley came, stiff and formal, bearing an expensive silver rattle. "For the child," she said curtly, not meeting Annabelle's eyes. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of Hope's innocence, if not her mother's acceptance. The parade of visitors brought gifts and wisdom, remedies for colic, advice on feeding, promises of help when needed. Annabelle received them all from bed. Hope nestled in her arms or Eli's, never far from protective reach. "The whole town's come by," Eli marveled one evening, after the latest wave of well-wishers departed. "Community," Annabelle said simply. "We're part of it now, really part of it." He sat on the bed's edge, watching Hope sleep in her cradle, a beautiful piece he'd crafted through the winter months, carved with flowers like those in their garden. "Do you ever think about him?" Eli asked quietly. "Samuel, what he'd think seeing you now?" The question might have hurt once. Now Annabelle considered it calmly. "He'd hate it, seeing me happy, free, loved. Seeing me with a child, he tried to ensure I'd never have—" She looked at her husband, really looked at him, this man who'd given her everything Samuel tried to take. "But I don't think about him much anymore. He's the past. This, you, Hope, our life. This is what matters." Eli took her hand, thumb tracing the gold band she wore. "No more looking back? Only forward." She squeezed his fingers. "Besides, we'll be too busy to dwell on yesterdays. Babies are demanding creatures. I'm learning. As if to prove her point. Hope stirred and began to fuss. Eli scooped her up with growing confidence. Walking and bouncing as he'd learned soothes her. Your mama's right, he told the baby seriously. You are demanding, but we don't mind. We waited too long for you to complain now. Watching them, her husband and daughter, bathed in lamplight, Annabelle felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. She'd arrived at this place broken and running, certain she'd never know peace again. Now she lay in a bed she shared with a good man, watching him comfort their miracle child, surrounded by a community that had claimed her despite her past. Her mother arrived 2 weeks later, taking the train from St. Louis, with trunks full of baby clothes and years of apologies. The reunion was tearful, examination of the granddaughter she'd thought she'd never meet. Careful reconciliation between women separated by tragedy and misunderstanding. I should have protected you. Her mother wept. Should have seen what Samuel was. You couldn't have known, Annabelle assured her. I hid it well. We all did, back then. They talked through long afternoons while Hope slept, rebuilding their relationship stitch by careful stitch. Her mother extended her stay, helping with the baby and household, giving Annabelle precious time to heal and rest. Eli's a good man, her mother observed one day, watching him work with the horses through the window. Nothing like Samuel, Annabelle agreed firmly. Eli's what a husband should be, what a father should be. Indeed, Eli had taken to fatherhood with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything. He walked Hope through the evenings when colic struck, singing old army songs in his gravelly voice. He carved toys from wood scraps, already planning the pony she'd ride when older. Going to spoil her, Annabelle warned, watching him fashion a tiny wooden horse. Absolutely. He agreed without shame. She's got my whole heart. You both do. One evening, as spring ripened towards summer, they sat on the porch, all 3 generations. Annabelle's mother held Hope while Eli and Annabelle worked companionably in the garden. The plants they'd started as seeds were now heavy with promise. Tomatoes, beans, squash spreading their broad leaves. Look at this life you've built, her mother said softly. From such sorrow, such pain, look what's grown. Annabelle straightened, earth on her hands, sun on her face. The cabin that had seemed like a prison when she'd first arrived now stood as sanctuary. The man who'd been a stranger now moved beside her in perfect rhythm. No words needed. The body that had been broken now thrived, having delivered the impossible. Ma'am? Young Tom Morrison rode up, tipping his hat. Got a letter here for Mrs. McCall from back east. Annabelle took it, recognizing the legal seal. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. What is it? Eli moved to her side. She read, then reread, hardly believing. Samuel's father died. His estate is settling debts, and apparently Samuel owed me money. Dowry funds he took but never legally claimed. She looked up in shock. They're sending $500. It was a fortune for struggling ranchers. Enough to expand the barn, buy more stock, secure Hope's future. Blood money. Her mother spat. No, Annabelle said slowly. Justice, finally. She folded the letter carefully. We'll put it aside for Hope, for her education, her choices, so she never has to marry for survival like I did the first time. That night, as they lay in bed with Hope in her cradle beside them, Eli voiced what she'd been thinking. Full circle. What? You came here with nothing but fear and a worn valise. Now look, family, home, community, even money from the very source that drove you to run. He pulled her close. Someone's looking after you. Annabelle McCall. Looking after us? She corrected. They were quiet, listening to Hope's breathing, to the night sounds of their land. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Once, that sound would have frightened her. Now it was just part of the landscape of home. I love you, she said into the darkness. I don't say it enough, but You say it every day, he interrupted. In how you touch our daughter, how you tend the garden, how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. He kissed her temple. I love you too. Have since you warned me off with fire in your eyes. Touch me and I'll leave, she quoted, smiling at the memory. Best bluff I ever called, he murmured. They slept then, curved together in their bed, hands reaching occasionally to touch the cradle, ensuring their miracle still breathed. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and wild, but inside the cabin, all was warmth and safety and love. In her journal, left open on the kitchen table, Annabelle had written, "The West took everything I thought I was, but it gave me everything I was meant to be. Wife, mother, survivor, home." The last word was underlined twice, as if to convince herself it was real. It was. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed following Eli and Annabelle's journey from strangers to soulmates, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, romance, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of Annabelle's transformation? Share your thoughts. I read every comment. Until next time, partners.